This is the primary school teacher that took her partner's life. Hello there, stranger. Today I'm going to be telling you about the case of Fiona Beal. Viewer discretion is advised. Fiona was in a relationship with Nick Billingham and they'd been together for around 17 years by the time of the events in question. Nick was 42, Fiona was 50, and as I said at the beginning, she was a primary school teacher. She taught year 6. Fiona and Nick had split up a number of times, with Nick having affairs outside of the relationship. One of those affairs resulted in a child, Nick's son, who was 2 years old at the time of the happening. Fiona had some mental health issues, struggling with depression throughout her adulthood. I'm not sure if she was being treated for it. And the pair did split up and get back together, so I think it's fair to say that the relationship was somewhat tumultuous. So they'd split up but got back together in 2019 and then moved into a home together in February of 2020 in Northampton. Fiona claims that serious issues began in June of 2020 when Nick was furloughed. A lot of people were. It was prime COVID time and we were in lockdown. Fiona claims Nick was coercive and controlling towards her, putting financial pressure on her and demanding acts, degrading her basically. Of course, no one really knows what goes on behind closed doors, and either way, we've only got Fiona's side of the story. The judge much later would allow for some submissions, but would also point out that these were in direct contrast to what others had reportedly seen in the relationship. Either way, the relationship was clearly breaking down, and Fiona, instead of leaving or finding a way out of the relationship, started plotting to take Nick's life. She developed an alter ego who she named Tulip22, and Fiona would basically play act as this person. Fiona described Tulip as reckless, fearless and efficient, ruthless. And that brings us to late October, early November 2021, when Nick was out working for the day, renovating a house. From the journal that she kept, the judge would later say that by the time Nick had returned home from work that day, Fiona had resolved to take his life. She spent the day play acting as Tulip and smoking all day. She would later on prepare a bath, which she left in for Nick. Her plan was to lure him into a false sense of security with the promise of intimacy. Fiona armed herself with a sharp implement, which she kept in her dressing gown pocket while Nick was in the bath, but would later stash in the bedside table drawer. She also had cable ties, a chisel and a black bag. It's believed that Fiona used the cable ties to tie Nick to the bed, all as part of her act. Once he was secured to the bed, she used the sharp on his neck once, and while he was bleeding, he asked her why. She would write in her journal that her last words to him were, quote, "so that you don't do to X what you did to me." The name of the person identified as X has not been released. She would then call in sick to work using COVID as a cover. This was 2021, so restrictions were still in place, allowing her to self-isolate for 10 days and, of course, stopping anybody from visiting the home. She used that time to cover her tracks. She would use Nick's phone to text his friends and family. She buried Nick in the back garden in a makeshift coffin made of breeze blocks, bedding and plastic. She covered that in cement and then compost, and then a potted plant. And then she told people that her and Nick had split up, that he had left her for another woman, and she continued about her life. She went back to work and garnered sympathy from her colleagues because, of course, she'd told them that Nick had left her for another woman. She even had Nick's mother over for a visit that December, just before Christmas. She had Nick's mother in the house, just feet away from where her son was buried in a shallow grave in his own garden. The callousness of that act really stayed with me on this one. She continued to use Nick's phone to text his family and friends, texting his mum that he had been to see Man U at the Old Trafford and that he was looking forward to the new year. As cold and cruel as that truly is, the pressure of what she'd done had started to get to Fiona. Her mental health deteriorated, her depression deepening. And then in February 2022, a community PC stopped by the house to check on Nick's van, which had been parked up close to a tree throughout a strong storm. The PC wasn't there about any suspicion of Fiona or even the circumstance. It really was about the van. But this sent Fiona into a panic, and that's, I believe, when she got the journal and started writing things down, and then she booked herself into a lodge, a holiday home type thing in Cumbria. She hurt herself, with the judge later describing it as a serious attempt on her own life. Some colleagues had become concerned about Fiona, and I believe it was them that alerted the authorities who attended the lodge, and it was that sequence of events that led to the discovery of the journals and Fiona's subsequent arrest. I'm unclear on the actual sequence of events there, so I'm unable to elaborate further. From the journals, the police, of course, understood what had happened, and Nick's body would be recovered in March of 2022. Her journal, she would say she had thought about leaving, but the things that he said and did to her fueled her dark side. She claimed that whenever he was cheating, he would up the ante on belittling, moaning and criticising. She accused him of spitting on her and threatening her during intimacy. Again, these are Fiona's claims. Nick is, of course, not here to defend himself. She went on trial at Northampton Crown Court with two defences. You'll never guess the first one, of course, diminished responsibility, and the second one, loss of control. But after some weeks, that trial collapsed for reasons unknown to me, and it was moved from Northampton Crown Court to the Old Bailey. By the time of the second trial, diminished responsibility was no longer available to Fiona as a defence. And so she had initially pled guilty to manslaughter on the grounds of loss of control. She withdrew that and pleaded guilty 3 days into the second trial, which was in April 2024. Was sentenced in May 2024 to a life sentence with a minimum term of 20 years. Judge did remind her that a life sentence is a life sentence and she can only apply to be released in 20 years. It's up to the parole board whether or not to release her. And that is the story of Fiona Beal, a primary school teacher turned murderess. As ever, rest in peace to the victim of this case, Nick Billingham. I don't know about the sentencing on this one. She had that man's mother in his house when he was buried just outside. And she used his phone to make people think that he was still alive and well. Not only robbed him of his life, but of the chance of a proper burial for over 4 months. She might have been in deep pain because of betrayal and heartbreak. She may have been suffering deeply from depression and mental health issues. But surely just walking out that door and starting fresh somewhere else has to be better than a minimum of 20 years in prison. And deep pain and mental health issues does not give you the right to take somebody's life. As prosecution said, she had no right to start a new life by ending the life of her partner. As ever, please let me know what you think in the comments. And if you've stayed with me up until now, then thank you for watching, and I will see you for the next one.